The Paramount War is unmistakably the most pivotal conflict in One Piece's pre-time skip. It carries the highest stakes of any arc, with rippling consequences following both Ace and Whitebeard's deaths. But once the dust settles, it is Admiral Akainu who emerges as the most dangerous figure in the world. Not just for his abhorrent actions, but for what he still represents today. This deep dive will be exploring the Admiral who embodies absolute justice, and why his shadow still looms over the endgame of the story. But at the heart of it all lies a tragic tale of a father that couldn't protect his son. With the son of Goldie Roger finally in the Navy's possession, Ace is scheduled for a public execution at Navy headquarters on the island of Marineford. Despite the Navy's seemingly advantageous position, people around the world dread the repercussions, as word is rich of speculation whether one of the 4 Emperors of the Sea, Whitebeard, will make an appearance, and if he could even pull off a rescue mission if he does show. Doubtless, the Navy calls in their whole fleet to protect the island of Marineford, and to ensure the execution is carried out, knowing their transgression will not go unpunished by the world's strongest man. The Navy spare no expense, calling in help from the 5 remaining warlords of the sea: Bartholomew Kuma, Gecko Moria, Don Quixote Doflamingo, Boa Hancock, and Dracula Mihawk. But atop the execution platform, the most powerful officers in the Navy, the admirals, sit, awaiting the arrival of the King of the Sea. Sakazuki is introduced alongside the other 2 admirals that we're already acquainted with: Aokiji the Blue Pheasant Kuzan, and Kizaru the Yellow Monkey Borsalino. Finally, Akainu, the Red Dog Sakazuki, makes his official debut, eyes hidden and legs crossed. However, this isn't the first time we've heard of him. Sakazuki is the Vice Admiral who blew up the ship carrying innocent civilians evacuating Ohara. He saw sparing lives as a risk he wasn't willing to take. His reasoning being that should a single scholar have survived the busticle, everyone who had died up to that point, their sacrifice would be in vain. Sakazuki is the only admiral our main cast haven't crossed paths with, taking into account the only prior knowledge we have of him, and what will soon unfold on Marineford. It's very apparent why. Oda himself acknowledges this, claiming that were Akainu the main character, the story would come to an end within a year. Akainu enters the war against the world's strongest man, launching his named attack Great Eruption, which casually vaporizes a giant iceberg. Magma flies across the battlefield, destroying one of Whitebeard's ships, prompting him to tell Akainu to stick to lighting candles on birthday cakes, Magma boy. With Sakazuki responding, in his only smile of the manga, "Don't you want a brightly lit funeral, Whitebeard?" This kicks off the duel between the Admiral and the Emperor. The stage is set, and the stakes are established. Whitebeard needs to save his son, pass the torch from the Great Pirate era onto the next, and take down Navy headquarters. Akainu has to prevent Ace's rescue, ensure the execution is carried out, while also fighting off the Whitebeard pirates and defending Navy headquarters from destruction. Sengoku took no chances against Whitebeard, with the Fleet Admiral never intending to give the world's strongest a fair fight. Instead, he hatches a plan to corrupt his legend from within. As the battle rages on, Akainu plays his role in the plan as the best instigator in One Piece, through goading, baiting, and targeting the emotional weakness of Whitebeard's reinforcements. Squad, an ally of the Whitebeard pirates, is manipulated into stabbing Whitebeard in the chest after being fed false information that the Emperor betrayed his comrades in exchange for Ace's life. It's a dishonorable tactic that shakes even the foundation of the pirate alliance. But instead of fury, Whitebeard meets Squad's treachery with heartbreaking compassion. Bloodied, weakened, and impaled by the blade of a son he trusts, he simply asks, "Who was it? Who lured you into the dark depths of doubt?" It's not a question meant to condemn, only riddled with sadness at who could have corrupted his son. In that one moment, we see the full weight of Whitebeard's love, not only as a captain, but as a father. He hugs Squad, forgives him, and refuses to let the Navy's manipulation poison the bonds he fought to build. While Whitebeard leads through renowned loyalty and love, the Navy under Sengoku's command and carried out through Akainu's ruthlessness fights with lies, psychological warfare, and sacrificial pawns. The Fleet Admiral's position, after all, demands more than strength. It requires strategic cruelty, and in Akainu, Sengoku is a perfect enforcer, a man willing to do anything in the name of absolute justice, even if it means destroying the very idea of honor to achieve it. After Squad's betrayal, Whitebeard sits with Crocodile's harsh insults. Though understanding of the former warlord's frustration, he is but one man with one heart, understanding that he cannot be the strongest pirate forever. Whitebeard by this point knows that he won't leave Marineford alive, yet nonetheless stakes his life on helping a young boy achieve his destiny, declaring to his men that they're forfeiting their lives to combat if they follow. Elbaf's first marine, John Giant, is the first victim of Whitebeard's Tremor fruit, as he's thrown into the ground with enough force to tilt the entire island of Marineford and even the ocean. He finishes the job with a tremor punch that flows through John and towards the execution platform, which would have utterly destroyed it had the three admirals not deflected it using advanced armament haki. Once Whitebeard breaks through the plaza, the real battle kicks off. Whitebeard charges up a tremor-infused attack with his specialized naginata, called the Murakuma Giri, which allows the Emperor to channel his full power through the blade due to its extraordinary durability. However, Akainu confronts him head-on and blocks the blow, stopping one of the strongest supreme-grade blades in the world, wielded by the world's strongest man with just his foot and hands in his pockets. Akainu tells Whitebeard that he can't just let him do it as he pleases, or the whole island will fall, which Whitebeard responds taunting him to protect it, entering yet another clash with the Admiral. With Aokiji, Kizaru and now Akainu occupied instead of maintaining their position of defending the platform, Marco makes a break for it to rescue Ace. However, Garp destroys any hopes Marco had at reaching the platform with a powerful punch that launches Marco to the ground. Whitebeard motivates his men to ignore the old soldier's notoriety, getting a smirk out of Garp. Not as hot on the humour, Akainu launches a lava dog towards the distracted Emperor, but Whitebeard casually redirects the attack towards the town instead, mocking Akainu's attempts to defend it. However, things take a turn for the worst, as Whitebeard is brought to his knees by a sudden heart attack. No longer hooked up to the equipment responsible for administrating the medication that stabilizes his illness, Marco's worst fear came to pass, as Whitebeard's rapidly declining health betrays him in the first of many crucial moments. The man, once nimble and agile enough to dodge Ace as he slept, has been reduced to a sitting duck to attacks that he'd otherwise have been able to evade. Previous encounters start to paint a different picture with this in mind, when looking at Luffy's deflection of Crocodile's attack, Joe's interception of Aokiji and Mihawk's attacks, coupled with Marco's sarcastic scuffles with Kizaru. It's like Marco said, "You can't take our king this early in the game. He is their most valuable piece on the board, but he's also their most vulnerable." With Whitebeard unable to defend himself and the commanders busy fighting, Akainu takes advantage of Whitebeard's vulnerability, leaping up and slamming a magma strike into his chest. If he were healthy, Whitebeard would have surely been able to dodge, just as he was able to redirect the previous attack Akainu launched. But unfortunately, this is a war, and so Sengoku capitalizes off of this window of opportunity, ordering soldiers to jump the old man. But he is still the man regarded as the ruler of the seas, and the definition of a tank. The legend stands tall, taking the punishment and destroys the cowards with a swing of his naginata. As powerful as this man is, he is consistently inhibited by his health condition, as he once again suffers a heart attack, preventing him from accessing Conqueror's Haki to save Ace, leaving Luffy the perfect opportunity to do exactly that. By the time Ace is finally unshackled, Whitebeard has been stabbed in the abdomen, had a heart attack, tanked a magma attack to the chest, gotten repeatedly stabbed and shot by Marines, suffered yet another heart attack, got shot in the chest by Kizaru, and yet he is still standing. Believing Ace to now be safe, Whitebeard dedicates his last moments to taking down the island of Marineford in a suicidal charge, gaining both Sengoku and Garp's attention. Ace and Luffy make a break for it, with victory only seeming to be a sprint away, but Akainu will not let them leave alive. In effort to defend his brother, Ace protects Luffy from Akainu's attack, leaving himself open to the punch, which melts right through his organs. After the critical hit, Ace's hit, "Stop Akainu," is yelled across the battlefield, desperately calling for backup from any of the surrounding fighters, showing Whitebeard, Marco, Jinbei, and even Garp and Kuzan. Even with the interference of division commanders, Akainu once again makes his way back to Ace. With no one else close enough, Jinbei manages to swoop in and redirect Sakazuki's finisher away from Ace. Garp approaches the fray, but he's quickly tackled by Sengoku, saying he'll kill Sakazuki if he's set free, but we'll come back to that. Saving Jinbei, Vista and Marco swoop in, attacking Akainu. While they keep Akainu busy, Ace sadly passes away in his brother's arms, and it is during Luffy's gut-wrenching breakdown that Akainu tries once again to take his life. Marco thankfully saves Luffy and buys Jinbei some time. Whilst preoccupied with Marco, Akainu confirms he doesn't intend on letting the brothers live, but that is just before Whitebeard comes out of nowhere, blindsiding Akainu with a tremor punch, slamming him into the ground, repaying the government dog for his murdered son and for the cheap shot he sustained earlier during his heart attack. What happens next is the most deadly exchange in the whole manga. Sakazuki gets up launching a hellhound so potent it melts off half of Whitebeard's face, with the Emperor slamming his fist into Akainu so hard it shatters the Admiral's body, making him the center point of an earthquake strong enough to destroy Marine headquarters. Akainu is sent falling down a huge chasm created from the attack and is presumed dead. But unfortunately for Whitebeard, his son's death would go unavenged, as where there's smoke, there's fire. Erupting from the ground, Admiral Akainu makes his unexpected return. After being struck by Whitebeard's most ferocious, bloodlusted attacks, 2 full-power, island-splitting quake punches to the head and torso, Akainu not only tanked them, but came back to the battlefield when literal giants were put out of commission after 1 blow from the Tremor Fruit. He had enough strength to tunnel through Magma beneath the plaza, ambush Jinbei, and continue his rampage across the war zone. The same cannot be said for Whitebeard, who succumbed to his injuries sustained during the war. Akainu withstood Whitebeard's wrath at its absolute peak, when Whitebeard had just witnessed Ace's death and had thrown away all self-preservation in favour of vengeance. Whitebeard intended to kill Akainu, and by all accounts should have, and yet he didn't. During their duel, Akainu and Whitebeard clashed on equal ground in terms of offensive output. Akainu's magma-based attacks were devastating, melting off half of Whitebeard's face and tearing open his chest. Despite Whitebeard ripping apart the ocean, his blows, though massive and destructive, couldn't fatally injure Akainu. The nature of the Magma fruit is inherently more lethal than the Quake fruit in a 1v1 context. While Whitebeard causes catastrophic environmental damage, Akainu's magma burns through internal organs and leaves devastating disabling wounds with incredibly potent environmental control, with volcanoes and molten rock. It is no coincidence that Oda gave Akainu such a high damage continuous output Logia. His fruit is suited for war, attrition, and complete annihilation. A common retort is that Whitebeard was old and sick, which is blatantly true, and I'm not going to be denying that fact, but using it to discredit Akainu's feats is where I find issue. Oda has consistently shown that the badass old characters of One Piece, Whitebeard, Garp, Rayleigh, and Goku, retain most of their former strength. In interviews, Oda has stated he likes the idea of old men being strong and dangerous, old lions that haven't lost their fangs. But what really screwed Whitebeard was that he no longer had the stamina to fight as best he could. Regardless of how strong you are, if you're sick and exhausted, you're not going to be performing at your best. But even while sick with Itachi's imaginary ninja cancer, Whitebeard was literally splitting the ocean in half. He tanked hundreds of bullets and cannonballs, got his face melted off, and still stood tall. He was a monster even in old age. And that's the point. Akainu defeated Whitebeard at his most enraged, his most desperate, his most bloodthirsty. He didn't beat a feeble old man. He survived a demon on a warpath and lived to fight again. Some argue Akainu only survived for the sake of the story, but that dismisses the entire actual narrative point behind the fight. Oda wanted us to see Akainu get hit to show that this man is not just strong but terrifyingly resilient. The whole point of Whitebeard landing direct body shots wasn't to humiliate Akainu, but to demonstrate the Admiral's monstrous endurance. Akainu took the damage and got back up. If not for being designed after Bunta Sugawara, a famous actor of Yakuza characters that Oda adores, even in verse, it's clear that Akainu is a character that Oda intends to handle with respect, having even said so himself. While it's impossible to declare absolute victors in hypothetical fights, if we place these two in a controlled 1v1 scenario where they can throw caution to the wind with no interruptions or battle chaos, Akainu still has the edge. Whitebeard is a close-range fighter with high AoE power, but against a Logia with a burning hot fruit, higher stamina, and lethal offense that demands evasion, the tide turns in Akainu's favour, with Whitebeard being a ticking time bomb due to his terrible health. The powers of an Earthquake Man are catastrophic in scale, but a Magma Man is just that much more violent by comparison. Akainu's Magma melts you from the inside out. When a Magma Fist meets a Quake Punch, they'll clash, but the Magma wins in attrition, something Blackbeard seems to agree with. Whitebeard died accomplishing his goals, ensuring Luffy would be rescued, destroyed a hefty chunk of Navy headquarters, but he couldn't defeat Akainu, or Blackbeard, and he couldn't save Ace. But just like on God Valley all those decades ago, the demons got away with yet another father trying to do right for his family. Akainu makes short work of Eva and Inazuma's efforts to stall him, propelling his body like a volcano after Jinbei. Finding that his attacks won't work and he can't stop Sakazuki's ascent, Jinbei braces for impact as he's punched all the way through with molten rock, which spills onto Luffy's chest, horrifically scarring him. Before he can kill either of them, Crocodile cuts Akainu in half and launches Jinbei and Luffy away. Though due to Akainu being a Magma Man, he's able to simply reform his body. However, eager on protecting Luffy and Jinbei, 10 Whitebeard division commanders as well as another former warlord stand in his way. Though we don't get the play-by-play from the manga, the next time we see Akainu, 10th Division Commander Curiel is consumed by fire at his feet as Akainu yells with a whetted appetite. In an effort to stop the massacre, Kobe desperately begs Akainu to stop fighting and to prioritize treating the wounded. Unfortunately, the sentiment falls on deaf ears, as the Admiral is far too brainwashed by his philosophy of absolute justice to pay more than a couple seconds of attention. But that was all that was needed. Within those few seconds bought, Redhead Shanks arrived, stopping Akainu's attack in its tracks and shifting the balance of power on the battlefield entirely. The Marines were spent, ruined from their clash with Whitebeard's forces, and the thought of immediately launching another war, this time against a fresh Emperor's crew, bordered on madness. Shanks made his stance clear. If anyone still wants to fight, we'll be your opponents. And it wasn't a bluff. As bloodthirsty as Akainu was, even he understood that an exhausted and disorganized navy stood no chance against Shanks and his commanders, especially in his own condition. With Fleet Admiral Sengoku holding the final authority, his acceptance of Shanks' ceasefire made it official. The paramount war was over. Akainu may be hot-headed, but he's still a soldier bound by the chain of command. Continuing to fight after a direct order to stand down wouldn't have been justice, it would have been insubordination when he himself punished disobedience with death. And for what? Whitebeard was already dead, Blackbeard had withdrawn, and Luffy had escaped into the sea, beyond the reach of Magma. What use are molten fists against an enemy submerged in the depths? Only Aokiji or Kizaru could realistically pursue a target underwater. For Akainu, pressing on further simply wouldn't have made any sense. After his escape from Marineford, Blackbeard arranges a trade with the Navy, a captive jewelry bonny in exchange for a warship. However, once Van Olga tells Teach that a ship is indeed on its way, but Akainu is on board, Blackbeard ditches the plan and flees immediately. Blackbeard by this point has the powers of a Darkness Man and an Earthquake Man, as well as his entire crew with him, and yet he runs on sight of Akainu. He fought both Sengoku and Garp with his crew right off the back of attaining the Tremor fruit. He did so confident he was ushering in a new era, Blackbeard's age of piracy, and that the old legends were merely relics of a bygone era. Yet once Sakazuki starts paying mind to Teach, no longer preoccupied as he was in the war with Whitebeard or Luffy, Blackbeard doesn't even entertain the idea of battling him. Instead, he backs out of the encounter entirely, with even more haste than he stood against Shanks and the Redhead pirates at Marineford. A counter-argument in favour of Teach is that due to him essentially being a coward, he only enters a fight if he knows for certain that he can win. The fight just wasn't worth the risk for the reward. Should he have stood his ground, he would only have needed to draw the Admiral in with his Dark fruit, disable Akainu's problematic Magma powers, and defeat him in close quarters combat with his Tremor powers. However, the first issue here is assuming Sakazuki's Logia is why he is such a big problem, when it is actually what he literally embodies, the immovable object of a volcano. He is uncompromising in his path paved with unrelenting strength, equipped with a terrifying manipulative cunning and resilience dedicated to his belief that absolute solutions, with no leeway, is the only true form of justice. Relying strictly on Logia abilities in a fight is exactly what Akainu criticized Ace for, causing for him to get badly burned due to his superior Devil Fruit. Oda himself explains how there are higher powered versions of existing Devil Fruits, one of which being the Magmag Fruit over the Flame Fruit. However, just like power levels in Dragon Ball, the stats on paper is not what decides a fight. Akainu not only had the superior fruit, but vastly more experience, and as much as Ace fans will hate to hear it, Fire Fist was doomed the moment he stopped running, falling for the hook, line and sinker Akainu was betting on. Whether or not you have the better Devil Fruit variation is not a guarantee for victory. It would certainly help, but there are always other factors to be mindful of. Akainu is a man of tactics and strategy. He isn't careless. He utilizes his Magma powers with brutal efficiency, alongside his advanced armament. On the off chance that Blackbeard successfully nullifies the Magma Fruit in a favourable scenario, Sakazuki still has access to his superior raw strength and advanced armament to defeat Blackbeard. He would simply do exactly what Whitebeard did. Akainu is not stupid nor is he arrogant. He is scarily logical in his pursuit of optimized evil. He would not provoke a fight against the entire crew of the Blackbeard pirates, fully understanding the terms of the trade, were he not confident in his ability to wipe them out. There's a reason why Teach waited until Sakazuki had fatally wounded Whitebeard and had been removed from the battlefield before he announced himself. He does not want the smoke. And to top it off, this is before he even fought Aokiji and became even more powerful. Since Sengoku retired after the Paramount War, he recommended Aokiji for the vacant position of Fleet Admiral. However, the elders preferred Akainu. The usually laid-back and cool-headed Kuzan despised the notion that Sakazuki would be instated as the next fleet admiral, of course deeply affected by Sakazuki's atrocious massacre of Ohara's innocent civilians, and so provided direct opposition to his succession. The two men left the decision to the result of a duel, with the pretenses of dead men tell no tales, wherein the victor seizes the right to control the navy, and the loser relinquishes their right to object. While Kaido and Luffy splitting the sky was impressive on Wano, Akainu and Aokiji terraformed the entire island they were fighting on, permanently altering its climate into a hellscape of extremities, with one side consumed by snow and ice, and the other ruled by fire and lava. The fight lasted for 10 entire days straight, with both admirals going full power. Eventually Sakazuki would emerge the victor, sparing Kuzan's life out of mercy, but without a leg and a broken resolve, Kuzan left the navy, refusing to work under Sakazuki's rule. When looking at the remnants of Punk Hazard, there's an unmistakable pool of water positioned perfectly in the middle of the hellscape. The detail I love about this is it encourages the idea that this wasn't a timid conflict with each side scared to engage. Considering how badly both fighters wanted to win, it seems more likely that Akainu and Aokiji met in the center like it was the last 10 seconds of a Max Holloway fight, with both men duking it out, refusing to give up ground and just lay it all on the line. Both Kuzan and Sakazuki have incredibly powerful temperature-oriented Logia devil fruits, but once cancelled out, the victor will be decided based on who has the advantage in all other attributes of the battle, one of which being Kuzan's most slept-on asset, his insane physical strength. Kuzan started training under Garp in his early 20s, following the same training routine as the legendary hero, using Navy battleships as punching bags. The rules were simple: no haki and no devil fruits allowed, just your fists. The battleship bags are right next to each other, with both Kuzan and Garp having carved out the same amount with the same sound effect playing. Whether you think Garp is stronger, they're equals, or Kuzan is stronger, they're at least relative in strength. As a frame of reference for how insanely effective battleship bags are, Kobe with only 2 years of experience was able to perform an insane destructive capacity feat, shattering the island man Pizarro's arm into smithereens with just one punch. As of 1162, Kuzan is 49 years old, giving him approximately 15 to 20 years of Garp's mentorship, a bond so valuable to Kuzan that it weighs on him throughout their entire fight, an endeavour he can only see as a tragedy, consumed by guilt and concern. Kuzan's resignation wasn't just the end of an era in the Marines, but it marked the beginning of Garp's worst fears coming true. For decades, Garp stood as the conscience of the Marines, a man who fights not for the world government's will, but for the little guys who can't defend themselves. His justice has always been human, messy, compassionate. He sees the Marines as guardians of peace instead of enforcers of order. That's why he trains students like Kuzan and Kobe to think for themselves, to feel before they act. That's why Sakazuki terrifies him. Sakazuki is the embodiment of everything Garp fears the Navy could become: blind, unfeeling, mechanical, a system that burns the innocent for the illusion of safety to be maintained. To Garp, men like Sakazuki don't represent the future of Marines, they represent its extinction. That's why Garp refused promotion to Admiral, and eventually walked away from active duty altogether. He couldn't serve under an institution that would raise a man like Sakazuki to its highest rank, and yet he couldn't abandon the organization completely either. By remaining as a recruiter, Garp clings to the only thing he still believes in: the next generation. He knows he can't change Sakazuki's navies from the top down, but maybe, just maybe, he can protect it from the bottom up. Kobe, Helmeppo, Kuzan, they are his students, but also his last stand. Each one is a chance to keep the light of justice from going out completely. Where Sakazuki seeks to erase weakness, Garp seeks to nurture strength. Where Sakazuki punishes bloodlines, Garp sees potential. To him, family is determined not by the world government's ledger, but by the bonds we choose. That's why Garp stood for Luffy, for Ace, and for Kobe. That's why, when faced with Sakazuki, his anger transcended personal to generational. He's staring at the death of the Navy's soul and the rise of the monster it was meant to prevent. Unfortunately, Kuzan couldn't beat Akainu, and honestly, neither can Garp. As I mentioned earlier on, Garp claimed he would kill Sakazuki had Sengoku not stopped him. But as physically strong as Garp is, the old man's durability and endurance don't hold a candle to Sakazuki's. In just the Paramount War alone, Sakazuki endured powerful blows from bloodlusted Whitebeard and still had the stamina reserves to win an 11v1 against the Whitebeard commanders and Crocodile. That doesn't even include the best endurance feat in the verse, with Sakazuki fighting Garp's own protege at his max. He had the perfect counter to Akainu's Magma Devil Fruit powers, and yet he was still defeated after enduring the hardest fought battle in decades. If it wasn't already obvious, the old hero has next to zero chance at outlasting the Red Dog. Sakazuki fought a Kuzan who acted with eyes unclouded, determination pushing him full throttle. But in Garp's case, he fought his former student, a man heartbroken, in mourning, struggling to find his place in the world. Kuzan can only simmer in his emotions as he's filled with doubt behind his every action. The ideological conflict before him causes Kuzan to waver and hesitate, but having grown since Marineford, Garp doesn't let mentality stand in the way of what he knows he has to do. Garp even goes so far as to berate his student throughout the fight for being soft, but what is most telling is how he's also talking to the broken man that he was back at Navy headquarters, for the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Kuzan's loss to Sakazuki derailed his life, causing him to lose faith in justice and his own path, an event that was very close to occurring back at Marineford had Sengoku not stopped Garp. He's the legendary hero of the Navy, the poster boy of justice, the man who sticks his neck out for the little guy. He's the man who fought evenly with the Pirate King, yet when it came to making a decision between his duty and his family during the Paramount War, he was torn. It was that indecisiveness that meant he was loyal to his responsibilities. Just the wrong ones. His grandson was brutally scarred, his life's rival's son entrusted to him was murdered before his very own eyes, and Navy headquarters was destroyed before Garp could find it in himself to act. And by the time he was approaching Sakazuki, the damage had already been done. Garp was absolutely distraught during Marineford, and his performance against Kuzan serves as a what-if of sorts had Garp made the right choice. Brokered from his conversation with Dardan and riddled with guilt for allowing Ace to die, Garp refused to stand idly by as the same fate would reach Kobe, motivating the hero to save his new protege. No one attribute is as telling that Garp and Luffy are related than their infectious optimism and larger-than-life personalities. The qualities that Garp, Luffy and Dragon have in spades is their charisma and tenacity to work towards their goals. It is an undeniably attractive trait prevalent in the Monkey D family, with those they encounter feeling a strong desire to help them. And it's no surprise in Luffy's case, he is constantly declaring his promises aloud, holding himself accountable for his word, and every single time he fights with all he's got in order to manifest his destiny. No matter who stands before him, whether it be the world's strongest man or the world's strongest creature, he will be the king of pirates. Kuzan specifically mentions that Garp's ability to freely speak his mind and do what he wants is a trait that he's always respected about him. Living up to his namesake, Dracula Hawkeye's Mihawk identifies the danger that Luffy poses to the world government from only his brief interactions with him, clearly wary of the power capable of uniting masses under a sigil. Garp was finally able to find justice in fighting for a cause he believed in, allowing him to put all his cards on the table, giving us one of the coolest one versus many standoffs in the manga. This quote embodies it perfectly. How does he stand against so many without losing a step? This old man's crazy. Garp has that dog in him. He is confident and forthright, wielding power earned through years of blood, sweat and tears. He is fueled by dedication and sheer will. But just as the case was for Kuzan and Whitebeard, Garp wouldn't be able to keep Akainu down due to his grueling endurance, and since he wouldn't be able to outlast him, Garp would be in a very dangerous position if he doesn't finish the fight quickly. Garp wasn't able to avoid damage on Pirate Island for long, which, paired with his depleted stamina from old age and the cowardly tactics used by the Blackbeard pirates, put him in a dire situation quickly once he got stabbed. I don't expect anything less from the guy who was clashing with the Pirate King's sword with just his bare hands. He had 3 future Emperors of the Sea running from him in God Valley. He entered a battlefield by launching his ship onto the island, jumping from it to throw a battlefield nuke off rip, only to complain it wasn't as good as he could have done in his heyday. As much as I love his bravado and his guts, a glaring issue for Garp is if the world's strongest man's earthquakes aren't enough to even knock Akainu unconscious, Garp would be running low on stamina after his 3rd galaxy impact still hasn't put Akainu down, whom, regardless of his injuries, would still be able to fight for days straight. Akainu's advantages in the long game are already problematic enough, but the situation gets drastically worse once you also consider his overwhelming offensive capabilities. Bolstering the strongest attack power among Devil Fruits, Akainu wields Devil Fruit on the highest tier of strength, which does not bode well coupled with the fact that he has the most brutal fighting style in the verse. His attacks are constantly maiming or scarring his opponents, which, thanks to Haki, blocking is still an option, but his attacks are incredibly potent, and if not guarded against, can be lethal. Garp would have to block the Molten Rock perfectly every time, but just like against Kuzan, he'd get nicked, and over time, if it's magma instead of ice, Garp failing to dodge would put him in Whitebeard's predicament. With the introduction of Cross Guild, we now have bounties for Marines as well as pirates and revolutionaries. The most intriguing aspect of this system is the values assigned to each Marine rank. Admirals are worth 3 crowns, with each crown being worth 1 billion berries, making their bounty 3 billion. The Fleet Admiral's bounty is 5 crowns, which would mean Sakazuki's bounty is 5 billion berries. That's the highest bounty of any living character in One Piece, higher than Big Mom, Kaido, and Shanks. His only known superiors are Whitebeard and Roger. If you are still in the camp that Akainu wouldn't be a crucial player in the endgame, now is the time to place your bets. Fatherhood is without a doubt one of the most important themes discussed throughout the Paramount War. Oda addresses this ideological conflict directly through each faction's most powerful figures, Sakazuki and Edward Newgate, 2 men defined by power, duty, and conviction, yet standing at opposite ends of what it means to be a father. Sakazuki's very name comes from the Sakazuki Cup, a vessel used in Japanese tradition to seal bonds of brotherhood and loyalty, a symbol of sacred unity. Yet in a cruel stroke of poetic irony, Sakazuki stood for the destruction of that very bond when he killed Ace before Luffy's eyes. With one blow he shattered one of the series' deepest connections. With the next, he scarred Luffy both physically and emotionally, branding his chest with the shape of failure and loss. That wound became more than a burn, it became the mark of an unhealed grief. A reminder that justice without compassion is indistinguishable from tyranny. To Sakazuki, blood defines destiny. The Sons of Dragon and Roger are not individuals, but merely inheritors of sin. Under the guise of absolute justice, he becomes judge, jury, and executioner, believing it to be his right to burn out entire families in the name of justice. Even after acknowledging Luffy's lineage is not solely the world's worst criminal, but the grandson of the legendary hero Garp the Fist, Akainu doesn't change his mind whatsoever, if not doubles down on his belief that Luffy cannot be allowed to live. If one apple is rotten, then the whole orchard must burn. Sakazuki is the embodiment of absolute justice, the warped ideology endorsing any means necessary to achieve justice. He kills without hesitation and treats nuance, compassion, and moral ambiguity as a waste of time. Akainu is a man made of molten rock. He doesn't even tread lightly. His power mirrors his philosophy, relentless and all-consuming. There is no space for compromise, no room for mercy. His justice leaves no survivors, no grey area, no chance for redemption. Even Bonnie's tears for her father fall uselessly before him. Sakazuki's world has no place for chosen families or forged bonds. To him, fatherhood is a bloodline, and that blood is either pure or corrupt. But what if he's wrong? What if the will that drives a man to protect his daughter, even as a hollowed-out machine, proves that love can persist beyond flesh, beyond program, beyond sin? Kuma's existence challenges everything Sakazuki believes. If even a weapon stripped of identity can still choose to protect, then perhaps the real flaw isn't in pirates or revolutionaries, but in a justice that denies the soul's capacity to choose what it loves. Unwanted orphan, a blemish, a stain. That's what the world called him. A reminder that some lives are seen as mistakes before they even begin. But Edward Newgate, the man we would come to know as the legendary pirate Whitebeard, rejected that cruelty. He rose from a world that treated him as disposable, and answered it not with vengeance, but with love. Whitebeard's dream was never treasure, power, or fame, or even the One Piece. He longed for something more profound, a family. In a world where betrayal is currency and bloodlines define worth, Newgate built something revolutionary. A found family bound not by genes, but by loyalty, honor, and mutual respect. He didn't simply want to have a son. He wanted to create a home for the discarded, the lost, the misunderstood. He sought to give others the very thing he was denied from birth. Wherever he stood, Whitebeard inspired awe. His presence alone calmed his allies and terrified his enemies. He was more than a pirate. He was a pillar, a protector, the patriarch. While Sakazuki clung to prejudice and division, Newgate believed in unconditional love. To him, it was not the blood in your veins that determined your value, but the heart in your chest and the strength of your character. Whilst the whole world saw Ace as the son of the devil, the boy who bore the blood of the world's most hated man, Whitebeard's love was proof that a person could be more than their birth. Whitebeard saw a boy worthy of belonging, a son to fight for, even in the face of death. As Marco recalls and the God Valley incident confirms, Newgate was a cheapskate, always drinking on someone else's tab, but his true wealth lay not in the gold or plunder, but in the sanctuary he built for his sons on Sphinx. Every coin spent, every battle fought was an investment into his family's future. He might not buy the next round, but he'll charge through the gates of hell for you with a smile on his face. And he did, time and time again. When Fishman Island was under attack, Whitebeard stepped in for his brother in bond, declaring the island to be under his protection. Every man that Whitebeard drank with, Rocks, Roger, Shanks, in each he established a bond of kinship and mutual respect. When Ace, his son, faced public execution, Whitebeard did not hesitate. The entire navy stood between him and his child, and still, he declared war on the world itself. Not for glory, not for power, but because his son needed him. He even refuses to let Ace take accountability for chasing Teach, and comforts his son that he had given him the mission. Even in his flaws, his stubbornness, his pride, Whitebeard embodied the virtues of a father that every young man is taught to admire. Strength, honor, integrity, sacrifice, benevolence, and unwavering purpose. He wasn't perfect, but he was real, and stood for something larger than himself. Akainu calling into question Whitebeard's legacy in front of Ace was a tactical manipulation in order to provoke a fight, but it was still an attack on the very foundation of Ace's self-worth. The man who gave him purpose, dignity, and love when the world gave him nothing. Ace's fury was blind, but it was a deeply human reaction because Whitebeard wasn't just his father in name. He was the man who proved that Ace could be more than a bloodline, more than a legacy of destruction. It's easy to call Ace stupid when hindsight is 20/20, but when his father committed himself to a suicidal charge to ensure that his children could escape, dishonoring that same man would invoke almost a primal rage, which unfortunately is what Sakazuki was counting on. Even in death, even with half his face gone, he would never fall. Whitebeard went out like a badass with his head held high. His death was both tragic and triumphant. As the legend himself said, there is no ship that could carry him into the next era. He had the most respectful, awe-inspiring death in the whole One Piece manga, a juggernaut of compassion and power. In his final moments, he didn't curse the world that rejected him. He smiled because he had built one that accepted him. Even after his death, his sons carry on his will. The family he created did not die with him, instead it lived on in every one of his children. One life spared, one legacy continued, all because of the love of one man who dared to dream beyond blood and birth. Edward Newgate wasn't the world's strongest because of his devil fruit powers. He was the strongest man in the world because he never let the world define his worth, and never let his sons forget theirs.